I thought tonight would be perfect. The kind of night you remember forever. I smiled as I stepped through the doorway, expecting warm laughter, soft lighting, a celebration meant for me. Surprise! A chorus rang out, and for a moment my chest swelled with love. Adrian stood near the center holding a glass, his grin wide, Lily beside him pretending to share in my joy. Happy engagement night, babe, Adrian said, his voice warmer than usual. I hope you're ready for tonight. I am, I replied, my voice slightly trembling. My eyes scanned the room, friends, co-workers, faces I trusted. Everything felt perfect. Until it didn't. Adrian raised his glass a little too deliberately. Actually, there's something I need to say. He began, the room quieting. My stomach dropped, an unease settling in. What is it? I asked, forcing a smile. He hesitated, then looked directly at me. I can't do this. I can't marry you. I blinked. Excuse me. Lily is pregnant, he said, as though stating a fact, not a betrayal. It's mine. I'm staying with her. The room fell silent, eyes darting between us. My knees threatened to give way, but I forced myself to stand. Adrian. What are you talking about? I managed, my voice sharp now, disbelief coloring every word. Nothing to discuss, he said calmly. I made my choice. I turned to Lily, my best friend. You knew. Her lips trembled as if she were scared of me. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said, her eyes wide and innocent. I never wanted to hurt you. Never wanted to hurt me? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You knew about us and you still? She looked down, biting her lip. I didn't lie, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't erase this, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, but every word burned. You've destroyed everything. Adrian stepped closer. It's complicated, he muttered. I didn't want to hurt you, but it's done. Complicated. I repeated, my hands shaking. You're leaving me for her. For my friend. In front of everyone. Yes, he said, no hesitation. My friends shifted uncomfortably, some averting their gaze. I felt the weight of humiliation pressing down, suffocating. My heart throbbed painfully, every beat echoing the betrayal. I opened my mouth, ready to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. I can't watch this, I said, finally stepping back. My voice cracked. I'm leaving. Adrian frowned. Don't be dramatic. I ignored him, my eyes locking with Lily's one last time. No apology there, no regret, only self-preservation. I turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind me, but the sound felt like a hammer striking. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, but it didn't soothe the fire inside me. I pressed my hand to my chest, where my heart had shattered moments ago. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand justice, but the only thing I could do was breathe. And that was enough for now. Enough to realize the people I loved most had discarded me, trading my trust for desire, for convenience. Enough to understand my life had changed forever. Tonight everything burned. And I was left standing in the ashes. Returning to work felt like stepping into a cage. I could hear whispers as soon as I walked through the door, soft chuckles clipped by caution. My colleagues glanced at me, eyes wide, hesitant, as if I were fragile or worse, dangerous. I forced a smile and kept moving, gripping my coffee cup like a lifeline. Noah Chun, one of the junior analysts, approached quietly, his voice low. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? I nodded, following him to a corner near the conference room. What is it? He glanced around nervously. It's about Adrian and Lily. My stomach tightened. What about them? They've been saying things, he whispered. At least to some people. That you were controlling, bitter. That you overreacted after the engagement. I froze. They're lying. Noah's nod was almost imperceptible. Yeah. I've seen the texts and heard the stories. People are starting to doubt it slowly, but it's been messy. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Of course. They make me look unstable while they play victims. Typical. I just wanted you to know, Noah said softly. You're not alone in knowing the truth. Thank you, I muttered, my throat tight. I wanted to scream at Adrian, demand answers, reclaim my dignity. Pulling out my phone, I typed his name, my fingers trembling. We need to talk. Seconds later, his reply came. Move on with dignity. I stared at the screen. His words were sharp, cold, and final. Dignity. I whispered to myself. You think you can erase everything with a sentence? Noah peeked over my shoulder. Are you okay? I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. No, I'm not okay, but I will be. I lost more than love. I lost the person I thought I was. He looked concerned. That sounds heavy, but you'll get it back. You're strong. I don't feel strong right now, I admitted. I feel like I've been stripped bare. Like everyone I trusted built a story that erased me. And it worked, almost. Noah's expression softened. Almost. Yes, I said, my voice firmer. Because I still see the truth. And if they can rewrite my story in the shadows, then I can know I will rewrite it on my own terms. My way. He smiled faintly. Then I'll watch quietly as you do it. I nodded, grateful, though my heart still throbbed with betrayal. Thank you, Noah. It matters more than you know. Later, as I walked back to my desk, I felt a spark light inside me. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was clarity. They tried to define me with lies, but I was more than the story they told. I had a choice now, to let their version of me linger, or to reclaim my name, my identity, my life. And I chose to fight, quietly, strategically, without giving them the satisfaction of my despair. No one knew yet how far I would rise. But I did. I sat across from Dr. Elaine Harper, my hands folded so tightly my knuckles hurt. Rachel squeezed my shoulder and said, "She's brutal, but she saved me." Elaine didn't smile. She said, "Tell me why you're here." I swallowed. I got betrayed, humiliated, and erased. Elaine leaned forward. That's not an answer. Do you want revenge, justice, or peace? I blinked. I don't know. She nodded once. Good. Confusion means you're honest. Rachel laughed softly. She's allergic to pity. Elaine looked at me again. Pity keeps women small. What do you want your life to look like in 1 year? I hesitated. Quiet. Mine. Elaine said. Then stop orbiting their chaos. I said, I don't know how. She replied, you start by stepping away. Rachel asked, unpaid leave. Elaine nodded. Space is strategy. My chest tightened. What if I disappear? Elaine said. Then you finally meet yourself. I walked out with Rachel, my head buzzing. She said, she scared you, didn't she? I answered, she saw me. Rachel smiled. That's worse. I called my office from the parking lot. My manager said, is this about what happened? I said, it's about what I need. He paused. How long? I said, as long as it takes. He replied, send the form. I signed it that afternoon, my hand steady. Rachel asked, how do you feel? I said, terrified. She nodded. That means you're doing it right. That night my apartment felt hollow. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor. I said out loud, I don't know who I am without pain. The room stayed quiet. I went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. You look empty, I whispered. The mirror didn't argue. I said, I thought empty meant broken. I heard Elaine's voice in my head. Empty is space. I pressed my palms to the glass. I can rebuild here. My phone buzzed on the counter. I flipped it face down. I said, I choose me. The words felt strange. Then steady. Then real. I sat on the couch and said, I went to therapy today. Dr. Harper's voice echoed in my head. Say what scared you. I told the therapist, I'm afraid my silence looks weak. She said, silence can be training. I left lighter. At work, Noah leaned over and whispered, your report shut them up. I asked, them who? He smiled. Everyone. I said, I'm just doing my job. He replied, exactly. Later, Dr. Harper called. What did you avoid this week? I said, lunch with the team. She said, go tomorrow. I sighed. Why? She answered, power grows in rooms you enter calmly. The next day I sat down. A coworker asked, how are you holding up? I said, I'm busy. Another said, your numbers are impressive. I nodded. Thank you. My hands didn't shake. Noah messaged, Adrian tried to correct your data. I typed, did it work? He wrote, "No. Fax 1." I breathed out. That night Emily called. "You sound steadier." I said, "I'm practicing." She laughed. "Practicing what?" I answered, "Being boring and strong." In therapy I said, "I still hear their story." The therapist asked, "Whose voice is louder now?" I thought, "Mine." She smiled. "Keep feeding it." At work a manager said, "Lead the client call." I said, "Okay." After Noah said, "See?" I replied, "I didn't apologize once." He grinned. Growth. Dr. Harper met me for coffee. "Any urges?" I asked. "To check their pages?" She said, "And?" I said, "I didn't." She nodded. Small wins compound. I told her, "People ask less about them." She said, "Because you talk about results." I said, "It feels quiet." She answered, "Quiet is momentum." A rumor drifted by. Lily's timeline changed. I said, "I don't need details." Noah said, "Your presentation got shared." I asked, "By who?" He said, "By leadership." I smiled and stopped myself. "No celebrating yet." He said, "Why not?" I replied, "Because I'm building." At work I said, "I'll take the lead." A senior asked, "Are you sure?" I answered, "Yes." After the meeting Noah said, "They listened." I said, "I listened too." My therapist asked, "What did you choose today?" I said, "Boundaries." She asked, "With whom?" I said, "Everyone." Dr. Harper texted, "Status." I replied, "Progress." She wrote, "Define it." I typed, "Consistent." She sent, "Good." Emily called and said, "Any drama?" I laughed. "Less." She asked, "Joy?" I said, "More." At lunch a coworker said, "You're different." I replied, "Focused." Another said, "You seem calm." I said, "Practiced." A notification popped up with their names. Closed it. I said, "Not today." The room felt steady. I felt taller. I chose my work and kept moving. I reminded myself, no explanations. I heard Dr. Harper again. Evidence over emotion. I repeated it walking home. A stranger said, "Nice presentation." I smiled. "Thank you." I didn't think of Adrian or Lily. I thought of tomorrow. That focus felt earned, steady, and finally mine alone today. I heard the rumors before I asked for them. Noah leaned against my desk and said, "You didn't hear this from me." I replied, "Then don't say it." He lowered his voice. Adrian's project got pulled. I asked, "Pulled how?" He said, "Leadership lost trust." I nodded. "And Lily?" Noah hesitated. "She missed deadlines." I said, "That happens." He shook his head. "Not like this." I shrugged. "I'm busy." Later, Dr. Harper called. "What reached you today?" I said, "Noise." She asked, "Did it move you?" I answered, "No." She paused. "Good." I asked, "Is that cold?" She said, "It's contained." I told her, "People talk." She replied, "Let them." I said, "Part of me wants updates." She cut in. "That part is bored." I smiled. "True." At lunch a coworker whispered, "Have you seen Adrian lately?" I said, "No." She pressed. "He looks tired." I replied, "We all do." She frowned. "Lily's been snapping at people." I stood. "I have a meeting." My phone buzzed. Noah texted. Their timeline changed again. I typed, "I don't need it." He wrote, "Understood." After work Emily called. "You okay?" I said, "I'm steady." She asked, "Any feelings?" I answered, "Distance." She laughed softly. "That's growth." I said, "It feels quiet." She replied, "Quiet lasts." In therapy I said, "They're cracking." The therapist asked, "And you?" I said, "I'm not watching." She nodded. "That's choice." I added, "I don't want revenge." She asked, "What do you want?" I said, "Consistency." She smiled. "You're practicing it." That night my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Adrian wrote, "Hey, how have you been?" I stared. I heard Dr. Harper's voice. Urgency is a trap. I placed the phone face down. Emily texted, "Don't answer." I replied, "I won't." Noah sent, "Everything okay?" I typed, "Yes." The phone buzzed again. Adrian, "I hope you're well." I breathed out. "Silence," I whispered. Dr. Harper checked in. "Did you respond?" I said, "No," she said. "How does that feel?" I answered, "Clean." She replied, "That's power." I asked, "Is it cruel?" She said, "It's clear." The next day, Noah said, "People are asking questions." I asked, "About what?" He said, "Their story." I nodded. "Truth is slow." He smiled. "But loud." I said, "I don't need to hear it." He replied, "I know." At coffee, a colleague said, "You seem unaffected." I said, "I'm focused." She asked, "On what?" I answered, "My work." She laughed. "Fair." My phone stayed silent. I felt lighter. That evening, Dr. Harper said, "Karma doesn't rush." I replied, "I'm not chasing it." She said, "Good." I looked at my phone once more. No new messages. I set it aside. I said, "I choose calm." The room agreed. I was reviewing notes when Lucas Mitchell stopped by my desk. He said, "Do you have a minute?" I replied, "Sure." He smiled. "I recommended you for the Horizon project." I asked, "You did?" He nodded. "You earned it." I said, "Thank you." He added, "It's high visibility." I answered, "I'm ready." He studied me. "No hesitation?" I said, "None." He laughed. "Good." At lunch, Rachel called. "You sound calm," she said. I replied, "I am." She asked, "Did something happen?" I told her, "I got recommended." She paused. "By who?" I said, "Lucas Mitchell." She whistled. "That's big." I smiled. "I know." She lowered her voice. "Lily keeps asking about you." I asked, "What kind of asking?" Rachel said, "Nervous." I shrugged. "That's not my problem." Rachel said, "I'm proud of you." Back at work, a colleague said, "Congrats." I asked, "For what?" She said, "The project." I replied, "Word travels." She nodded. "People notice results." I said, "I focus on work." She smiled. "That shows." Another coworker added, "You're solid." I said, "Thanks." Inside, something shifted. Lucas called me into a meeting room. "We start Monday," he said. I asked, "Expectations?" He replied, "Lead your section." I said, "I will." He added, "Trust your judgment." I answered, "I do." He leaned back. "That confidence suits you." I smiled. "It's practiced." He laughed. "It's real." Later, Noah messaged, "Everyone's talking." I replied, "About work." He wrote, "About you." I typed, "That's new." He answered, "It's earned." I put my phone away. That evening, Rachel texted again. "Lily looked rattled today." I replied, "I hope she's okay." Rachel said, "You're kind." I answered, "I'm clear." She sent, "Different thing." I agreed. "Yes." I looked at my reflection in the elevator mirror. I said, "You did this." The doors opened. Lucas passed by and said, "See you Monday." I replied, "See you." My steps felt steady. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. People weren't seeing me as the woman who lost everything. They were seeing someone capable. I believed it too. Dr. Harper called that night. "How do you feel?" she asked. I said, "Centered." She replied, "Describe it." I answered, "Quiet confidence." She said, "Not borrowed." I said, "Mine." She paused. "Good." I asked, "Is this the shift?" She replied, "It's the start." I said, "I won't shrink." She answered, "You never should have." I thanked her. She said, "Keep choosing." The next morning, Lucas emailed, "Agenda attached." I replied, "Reviewed." He wrote, "Impressive speed." I answered, "Prepared." He sent, "See you lead." I smiled. A teammate said, "Glad you're heading this." I replied. We'll do it together. She said. I trust you. I nodded. That matters. Noah stopped by. You're changing the room, he said. I asked, how? He replied, people listen now. I said, I always spoke. He smiled. Now they hear. I considered that. I won't waste it. He said, I know. On the ride home, Rachel called. Still proud, she said. I replied, I feel solid. She asked, scared? I answered, no, she laughed. That's power. I said, it feels earned. She replied, exactly. I hung up smiling. I whispered, I choose myself. The city answered with silence, and I felt strong, visible, and finally unafraid. Walking forward without looking back. Ever. I was unlocking my door when Adrian said my name. I turned. He stood there, hands empty, eyes tired. He said, can we talk? I replied, not here. He said, I just need closure. I asked, for who? He swallowed. For us. I said, there is no us. He stepped closer. Lily and I aren't what I thought. I answered, that's not my problem. He said, I made mistakes. I replied, you made choices. He said, you don't have to be cold. I said, I'm not cold. I'm done. He sighed. You look different. I asked, better. He said, stronger. I nodded. I worked for it. He said, I miss you. I replied, you miss comfort. He flinched. That's unfair. I said, so was that night. He whispered, I never meant to hurt you. I said, intent doesn't erase damage. He asked, could we talk someday? I answered, we're talking now. He said, I mean properly. I replied, this is proper. He looked around. People are watching. I said, let them. He tried again. I thought you'd be angrier. I said, I was. He asked, and now? I replied, now I'm busy. He said, with what? I answered, my life. He reached out. Wait. I stepped back. No, he said. I just wanted to explain. I replied, I already understand. He asked, then why does this hurt? I said, because consequences hurt. He stared. You won't forgive me? I answered, forgiveness isn't access. I picked up my bag. He said, I really hoped we could talk someday. I replied, someday already passed. He asked, is there someone else? I said, that's not your business. He nodded slowly. You've moved on. I answered, I moved forward. I opened my door. He said, I guess this is goodbye. I replied, it's been goodbye. I walked inside and closed the door first. My phone buzzed later. Lily wrote, I'm sorry for everything. I stared. Another message followed. I hope you're okay. I typed nothing. She sent, I never wanted to hurt you. I said aloud, stop. Another message arrived. Can we clear the air? I replied by blocking her. Silence settled. I sat on my couch and breathed. I said, that's done. My chest felt light. I didn't replay his face. I didn't check her profile. I stood and poured water. I told myself, you're safe. The past knocked once and left. I stayed. I chose peace. I chose distance. I chose myself. The quiet answered and it felt like freedom. I texted Rachel. He came by. She replied, are you okay? I answered, I'm steady. She wrote, proud of you. I said, I walked away. She sent, that matters. I smiled. Then Noah messaged, saw Adrian earlier. I replied, I know. He asked, everything fine? I said, yes. He wrote, you handled it. I answered, I chose calm. He replied, that's growth. I opened my window. Night air moved in. I told myself, no explanations owed. I remembered Dr. Harper's voice. Silence is strength. I nodded. I deleted old photos. I archived old emails. I kept breathing. I felt separate. I felt done. Tomorrow waited without him. My name felt clean again. I didn't need witnesses. I didn't need apologies. I needed distance. I closed my eyes and said, I'm free. The word stayed. I stood quietly counting seconds. Nothing chased me. Nothing pulled me back. I felt finished, not broken. I whispered thanks to myself. I turned off the light, lay down, and slept without dreams. When morning comes, I will keep choosing myself again, always forward, unafraid, free. I learned the news from Noah. He said, have you seen the report? I said, no, he replied. Adrian's name is everywhere. I asked, what happened? He said, misused funds, false credit, angry clients. I stayed quiet. He added, people are asking questions. I said, good. He hesitated. Lily too. I asked, what about her? He said, her story keeps changing. I answered, truth does that. Noah lowered his voice. They blamed you for months. I said, I know. He continued, now emails are surfacing. I asked, from where? He said, old teams, old partners. I replied, it always circles back. He nodded. I thought you'd be happier. I said, I'm calm. He asked, really? I answered, yes. At work, whispers followed them, not me. Someone said, did you hear? Another said, I always wondered. I kept typing. Rachel leaned over. You okay? I said, I'm focused. She whispered, Lily left early again. I replied, that happens. Rachel watched me. You're different. I said, I'm free. My phone buzzed. Adrian texted, things are bad. I didn't answer. Another message came. I never thought it would end like this. I locked my screen. I said aloud, it already ended. Noah passed by. You don't owe replies. I said, I know. He smiled. Proud of you. I said, me too. Later, Dr. Harper called. You've heard? She asked. I said, yes. She said, how do you feel? I replied, distant. She said, that's growth. I asked, is this karma? She answered, it's consequence. I nodded. I didn't push it. She said, you didn't need to. I said, I don't feel victory. She replied, you feel peace. That night, news spread faster. Screens showed headlines. Friends messaged, are you okay? I answered, I'm steady. One asked, do you feel validated? I typed, I feel finished. I put my phone down. I made tea. I sat quietly. Lily emailed me. The subject said, please. I deleted it. Another came. I'm scared. I blocked the address. I said, not my emergency. My chest stayed calm. No shaking. No rush. Just space. I remembered when their voices filled my head. I said, not anymore. I looked at my reflection. You survived. I smiled once. Their world was loud. Mine was quiet. Their chaos spun. I stood still. I didn't win. I walked away whole. I heard coworkers talking later. Did you trust him? Someone asked. Another said, I defended her once. I kept walking. Someone else whispered, she was right. I didn't turn. Rachel caught up. This must feel strange. I said, it feels final. She asked, any anger left? I answered, none. She smiled. That scares people. I said, that's not my job. Noah sent one last message. They're meeting lawyers. I replied, I hope they learn. He wrote, you're untouched. I answered, I work to be. I closed my laptop. I said, enough. I went home early, light, unburdened, steady, complete. I whispered, I choose calm. I breathed deeply. The past felt distant. Tomorrow felt open. I didn't check updates. I didn't wait for apologies. I slept knowing silence protected me. That was justice enough. I woke rested, centered, certain, free, carrying no echoes, no shame, no debt, only myself, finally whole again. I smiled, stretched, stood, and stepped forward without looking back once. I first noticed Evan when he said, you don't have to explain yourself. I looked up from my notes. Most people ask questions. He shrugged. I listen first. I smiled. That's rare. He replied, so is honesty. We worked in silence after that, comfortable, steady. Later he asked, "Coffee?" I said, "As colleagues." He nodded. "Exactly." At the cafe he said, "You set boundaries well." I laughed softly. I learned the hard way. He didn't press. Learning still counts. I felt something loosen. Days passed. He checked in without hovering. "How's the project?" I said, "Manageable." He replied, "Good." No advice. No judgment. Rachel whispered, "He's respectful." I answered, "I noticed." Evan overheard and said, "I try." I said, "It shows." One afternoon he asked, "Want company on the walk?" I said, "If silence is allowed." He smiled. "Preferred." We walked. He said, "You seem lighter." I replied, "I am." He said, "You earned that." I stopped. "You don't know everything." He answered, "I know enough to be kind." My chest warmed. We talked more. "What do you want now?" he asked. I said, "Peace." He said, "That's reasonable." I waited for a joke. None came. I said, "You don't minimize things." He replied, "Pain isn't small." I nodded. "Thank you." He said, "Anytime." One evening I admitted, "I'm cautious." He said, "I respect that." I asked, "You won't push?" He answered, "I won't pull either." I smiled. "That feels safe." He said, "Good." We sat quietly. No tension. No rush. Noah teased me later. "You're smiling more." I said, "Am I?" He said, "Yes." Evan passed by. Noah added, "She's terrifyingly calm." Evan replied, "Calm is powerful." I met his eyes. "You see me." He said, "I try to." Weeks moved gently. Evan said, "I enjoy your company." I answered, "I enjoy yours." He asked, "Can we keep it simple?" I said, "Please." He smiled. "Then we're aligned." My heart stayed steady. One night he said, "If this changes, tell me." I replied, "I will." He said, "I'm not leaving." I paused. "That matters." He nodded. "I know." There was no promise, only presence. I realized something then. Love didn't have to hurt. Didn't have to rush. Sitting beside Evan, I felt no fear. I felt seen, respected, and unafraid to breathe. That was new. That was enough. I said, "I move slowly." He answered, "I can walk slow." I asked, "Even if I stop?" He smiled. "Especially then." I laughed. "You don't scare easily." He said, "I don't need to." Another day he checked in. "Too close?" I said, "No." He nodded. "Good to know." I added, "Thanks for asking." He replied, "Consent matters." My voice softened. "It does." Rachel later said, "You trust him." I answered, "I'm learning." She smiled. "It fits you." Evan joined us. Rachel teased, "Don't ruin her calm." Evan said, "I won't." I said, "I believe him." One quiet moment I admitted, I was afraid to try again. He said, "Fear means you care." I replied, "Care feels risky." He answered, "So does staying closed." I breathed. "This feels balanced." He said, "That's the goal." I didn't imagine futures. I didn't promise anything. I only noticed how steady my pulse stayed near him. For the first time, closeness didn't cost me. The announcement came during the morning meeting. My manager said, "We're recognizing outstanding contributions this quarter." I heard my name. Applause followed. I froze, then stood. Someone whispered, "She earned it." I said, "Thank you, steady clear." Another voice added, "Well deserved." I sat down, hands calm. Noah leaned over. "Proud of you." I whispered back, "Me too." Rachel texted under the table, "Your name looks good up there." I replied, "It feels real." Lucas nodded from across the room. "You delivered." I mouthed, "Thanks." After my inbox filled, "Congratulations. Inspiring work. Can we collaborate?" I answered, "Happy to talk." One message stood out. "Adrian, I saw the news." I stared. He wrote, "I was wrong." My chest stayed quiet. He added, I should have supported you. I didn't reply. I deleted it. The silence felt clean. At lunch, Rachel asked, "How does it feel?" I said, "Light." She smiled. "No revenge tour?" I shook my head. No, Noah laughed softly. "Growth looks good on you." I answered, "It fits." Later, Evan said, "They spoke your name with respect." I replied, "That mattered." He asked, "Any complicated feelings?" I said, "Not today." He nodded. "That's strength." I smiled. "It's peace." I walked past the old conference room. Memories flickered. Adrian once said, "You're not ready." I whispered, "I was." Evan heard. "You proved it." I said, "To myself." He replied, "That's the only proof that lasts." My phone buzzed again. A group chat mentioned Lily. Someone asked, "Where did she go?" Another said, "Her story didn't hold." I muted the chat. I said aloud, "Irrelevant." Evan said, "You're allowed." I nodded. In the hallway, my manager said, "You set a standard." I answered, "I'll keep it." She said, "We're glad you stayed." I replied, "So am I." My voice didn't shake. That evening, Noah called. "Drinks to celebrate?" I said, "Tea at home." He laughed. "Consistent." I smiled. "Content." He paused. "You okay?" I answered, "I survived." He said, "You did more." I replied, "I lived." Evan walked me out. "Any regrets?" he asked. I said, "Only that I doubted myself." He said, "You don't now." I answered, "No." He smiled. "Quiet wins are my favorite." I said, "Mine too." At home, I stood by the mirror. "You made it," I told myself. My reflection looked back steady. I said, "Without fighting." The room felt still. Another notification arrived. Adrian again. I didn't open it. I deleted the thread. I said, "Done." Evan texted, "Proud of you." I replied, "Thank you for seeing me." I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I breathed. Survival had a sound. It was quiet, firm, and finally mine. I woke before sunrise. Evan said, "Morning." I said, "Morning." He asked, "Ready?" I said, "I am." He smiled. "You look steady." I answered, "I feel steady." We walked outside. Evan said, "I'm beside you." I replied, "That matters." He added, "Not ahead." I said, "Good." He said, "Not behind." I said, "Better." He laughed softly. "Always with you." I answered, "That's love." Rachel called. "Did you see the email?" I said, "I did." She said, "They loved your proposal." I replied, "I loved myself writing it." Rachel laughed. "I'm proud." I said, "I hear it." She said, "You earned this." I answered, "I kept going." Later, Dr. Harper met me for coffee. She said, "How does power feel?" I said, "Quiet." She nodded. "That's real power." I asked, "Am I done healing?" She replied, "Healing doesn't end." I said, "Then what changed?" She said, "You choose yourself." I smiled. "Every day." She added, "Rebirth is silent." I repeated, "Permanent." She said, "Exactly." I checked my phone. No messages from the past. Evan noticed. "Peaceful?" he asked. I said, "Clear." He said, "Any ghosts?" I answered, "They faded." He touched my hand. "I won't replace them." I said, "You don't need to." He replied, "Good." Rachel joined us later. She said, "Look at you." I said, "Look at me." She grinned. "Untouchable." I answered, "Grounded." She said, "Stronger than before." I replied, "Wiser too." She said, "They thought they won." I said, "They stopped watching." That evening I stood by the window. I said aloud, "I survived." Evan said, "You transformed." I answered, "I chose." He said, "Your life begins." I replied, "It already did." I remembered the night everything burned. I whispered, "Thank you." Evan asked, "For what?" I said, "For ending." He nodded. "For starting." I smiled. For me. Dr. Harper texted. Keep your boundaries. I typed. I will. Rachel texted. Dinner soon. I replied, yes. Evan asked, anything else you need? I said, myself. He said, you have her. I answered, I do. I closed my eyes. I said, I'm reborn. Evan said, untouchable. I finished, and free. I breathed slowly. Evan said, this is your beginning. I replied, it feels endless. He said, endless is earned. I nodded. I earned myself. Rachel lifted her cup. To growth. I lifted mine. To truth. Dr. Harper added. To boundaries. I said. To silence. Evan smiled. To love without fear. I answered. To choice. We sat together. Evan asked, what would you tell her? I asked who? He said, the woman you were. I said, I believe you. He said, that matters. I said, it saves lives. Rachel leaned in. Any regrets? I said, staying silent too long. Dr. Harper said, silence can be preparation. I said, now it is peace. She nodded. That is mastery. Evan asked, what comes next? I said, work I love. He said, people who see you. I replied, a life I choose. Rachel said, you sound free. I answered, I am. The room felt warm. I said, I forgive myself. Evan said, that changes everything. I answered, it already did. Dr. Harper said, protect this. I replied, always. My phone stayed quiet. I said, no noise. Evan said, no chains. Rachel said, no shadows. I answered, only light. I stood up. I choose me. Evan said, say it again. I said, I choose me. Rachel clapped. Dr. Harper smiled. I looked ahead. I am not afraid. Evan said, you never were. I answered, I just forgot. He said, you remember now. I breathed out. This is my life. Evan replied, it always was. I finished, it finally is. I laughed. Rachel said, that sound suits you. I said, it stays. Evan said, so do I. I answered, beside me. He said, always. I said, untouchable. Free at last. I whispered, thank you. To myself today, tomorrow, and forever, standing whole, alive, chosen, complete.